Never go to the second location. Always trust your gut.
Paranoia, paranoia, everybody's coming to get me. Hello, my name is Chrissy Champagne. You are listening to Residue, a true crime podcast dedicated to keeping you paranoid. Thank you for being here today. You are officially a Residued, and Residue is hosted, created, written, researched, edited, and produced by me, Chrissy Champagne. Let's get the business out of the way real quick. You can follow me on Instagram at Residue Podcast, Facebook, Residue, a true crime podcast, TikTok, Residue, a true crime pod. And the best thing you could possibly do if you want to help out the show is leave a 5-star review. I am obsessed with you guys. I'm telling you, you have left me the greatest reviews. Literally makes me cry. Thank you. And please don't forget to follow the show so you can meet us back here every single Tuesday at midnight. Thank you so much. And it is time to get into the movie we will be talking about today, the true story behind my favorite horror movie ever. What's your favorite scary movie? The 1996 film Scream, directed by Wes Craven and written by Kevin Williamson, was inspired by the real-life murder spree of Danny Rolling, the Gainesville Ripper, and through the movie features a fictional, exaggerated plot. So the similarities largely stem from the general terror and details that Kevin Williamson adapted after watching a news report about the case of the Gainesville Ripper. You guys know I don't do many cases about serial killers. Have I done any at all? But this one scares the hell out of me. And as much as I love Scream, I've never really dived into exactly what Danny Rolling did until now. This is the scariest shit. I was frightened many times. I've had many nightmares this week. I decided this week that, I should do a horror movie or a scary movie because it's Halloween week. But then I got into this and I was this is beyond frightening. This is more than the word scary can even handle. Kevin Williamson has said that the script began after he watched a documentary about real serial killers and notably Danny Rolling while he was house sitting. And he got so scared that he was sitting there watching this and he noticed an open window. He got up and he grabbed a knife. And these anxieties fed directly into the opening sequence of Scream with Drew Barrymore. So this isn't a direct based on a true story type of script. So you'll notice as I am telling you the story of Danny Rolling and his victims, just kind of pick up on what you relate that to in the movie Scream. Scream deliberately draws on classic horror slashers that we love, like Halloween, Friday the 13th, and then earlier films like Black Christmas, which I highly suggest you watch if you have not seen that. Scream satirizes and deconstructs the genre of horror films. And the characters in Scream, they know the cliches, they know the movie rules, and they joke about them. So Kevin Williamson said that he wanted a horror movie that was both an homage and a satire. And Wes Craven initially turned down directing Scream several times. He said no, and he felt that he had done enough horror and he wanted new challenges. But Craven was once approached by a 12-year-old who said that he should do a real goddamn movie again because the movies you've been doing have been getting softer. And that 12-year-old who said that was what provoked Wes Craven to direct Scream. The release of Scream in 1996 reinvigorated the slasher genre, which at the time was becoming pretty stale. And I am very happy to admit that I was around, 20-something years old at the time Scream came out, and I got to see it in the movie theater. It was amazing. I actually got to see it opening night, and they were giving away t-shirts. They threw a t-shirt through the crowd. I got to catch one of them, and I wore that for so long that it got holes in it. The tagline on the shirt said, "Scream, make your last breath count." So like I said, it's not based on the exact story, but there are many key similarities, such as voyeurism. Danny Rolling, the Gainesville Ripper, he admitted to being a voyeur, watching his victims before he attacked. And Ghostface from Scream often watched and taunted his victims from a distance, such as the opening scene when he terrorizes Casey Becker, played by Drew Barrymore. There was also the staging of the bodies. In the real-life Gainesville murders, they are just so grisly, and it's going to be difficult to talk about. We're getting there, but Danny Rolling would pose his victims in theatrical and gruesome ways, the same ways that the killers in Scream stage their attacks and arrange the crime scenes in a grotesque manner. In one infamous scene, Ghostface leaves a victim's body hanging from a tree in full view of the public. There was also the local media frenzy because the real Gainesville murders, they created a panic that was widely covered by local and national news. In Scream, the relentless and sensational reporting of news reporter Gail Weathers fuels a similar media frenzy and panic in the town of Woodsboro. So, writer Kevin Williamson sitting in this house that, he wasn't used to being in. He was house sitting there alone in the dark, watching a news special on the Gainesville murders. When he comes to the realization that he's alone in the dark watching this true crime story about a home invasion, that whole experience he had became the foundation for the script, originally titled Scary Movie, which became the 1996 Scream. Danny Rolling was born on May 26, 1954 in Shreveport, Louisiana. Now, his mother got pregnant really quick after her marriage to his father, James, and his father was a very angry, abusive man. He got really upset that his wife got pregnant so quickly, that they were going to have a child so quickly, that as he grew up, Danny was often referred to as an accident. I mean, the slightest thing would set his father off. There were obscene amounts of child abuse in this home, and Danny was constantly told that he was worthless. His father was a cop, and his mother would stay home with the children because 16 months after Danny was born, she had her second baby, and Danny says that his mother always tried to protect him and his brother, and often she would try to leave with the boys and escape, but she always ended up going back to Danny's father. Danny's mother, Claudia, she had her own issues that she was struggling with, so it was often hard for her to tend to her sons in the way that they needed their mother at this time. She had some mental health struggles. There was a time where she stayed away from the home for 6 months. And when Danny was feeling really alone and scared, he would often go out into his neighborhood in the middle of the night when nobody knew he left his home, and he would go spy on his neighbors. He would just watch them through their windows, watch them, sitting around the TV, having family night, sitting around the dinner table, eating dinner together. And this is where his resentment started to grow. So you'll notice that Danny Rolling is a victim in his own mind. He deserves everything he's always wanted. And why does everyone else have it and he doesn't? I'm not going to get too deep into Danny's childhood because, fuck him. But here's a couple examples of how this child was being raised. So his father, James, finds a puppy while he's at work, and he takes this puppy home. This is a Huge trigger warning, and you probably know where I'm going with it, and skip ahead about 30 seconds if you don't want to hear this. Danny becomes very fond of this dog, and he was happy to have a companion and someone to talk to, even if it was a dog. His father constantly beat this dog, and according to Danny and also neighbors who witnessed this, they watched James kill this dog. And when Danny ran to the dog to save it, this dog actually died in Danny's arms. And Danny's father, James, was also that type of guy that thought that hugging your son was for sissies. That's his words, not mine. As a teenager, Danny got into playing guitar. He really got into music. And he also got into fantasizing about sadistic violence. And his fantasies were often sexually violent. And this is around the same time that Danny develops a serious alcohol problem at age 16. He would steal alcohol. He would take alcohol from friends' homes. And one day his father finds out about this. And obviously, his father's not going to take this well. He dragged Danny home by the neck and threw him into a juvenile detention center for 2 weeks. In 1971, around age 16, 17, Danny drops out of high school and he wants to join the Navy, but he doesn't pass the test. So he joins the Air Force instead, and he's only in the Air Force for about a year. He liked it at first. He liked the structure. He liked the sense of belonging, like everyone was a family, something he had never had, but he lacked discipline. So this guy's in the Air Force now, but he's using drugs nonstop. He's using acid, all these other drugs, and he ends up leaving the Air Force and going back to Shreveport. And now he is back home again, living with his parents. So he's back home. He's in Shreveport, Louisiana again. He starts becoming really obsessed with church, with religion. He starts going to this Protestant church in town. And this is where he meets a woman named Omatha Ann Halko. He marries her really quickly after meeting her, and they get married and have a baby within a year. So it's like mimicking what happened to his parents, you know? And he immediately begins drinking and smoking, and he leaves the church, and he starts becoming so irrational and abusive that his new wife is becoming afraid of him. I mean, he would threaten her all the time. He was just as abusive as his father was. He would even run off for days. She wouldn't know where he was going. He became this type of man who just had this black and white view of the world. 3 years into this marriage, his wife files for divorce. And this is something that Danny would always have as a huge resentment against her. It is often thought that most of the women that Danny preyed upon looked very similar to his wife, who is now leaving him. She's taking her control back. She's taking all of the control away from him. And this is something that would always be held as a resentment by Danny. Danny is now divorced. He's pissed off. He hates his job. He has a shitty job in a bakery. And to make matters worse, he's working one day and he cuts his finger off. So now he's lost a finger, he lost his wife, he lost his child, and he hates the world because everything is everybody else's fault. So Danny decides the best way to get money now is to just rob grocery stores. And he goes on this robbery spree. But by 1989, Danny has spent 8 years behind bars because he was arrested for these crimes. When he is released back into the world, after 8 years behind bars, he has to go live with his parents again. And by this time, he's 35 years old, unemployed, ex-con, living with his parents, divorced. He is pissed off at everything. So Danny has had enough. In his mind, oh, I'm so sad. Everything's going wrong for me and none of it's my fault, So he gets this job at this restaurant. He's working there. He has a fight with the boss. The next day he gets fired because they say he didn't show up for his shift, but Danny says he wasn't really on the schedule. Who even knows if this guy's telling the truth? But no matter what, the guy gets fired. And of course, it's not Danny's fault. No, it's everyone else's fault that he got fired. But this is the day that he kills his first victims. Danny Rolling had been watching Julie Grissom. He followed Julie home and he killed Julie Grissom, her father William, and her 8-year-old nephew, Sean. Julie Grissom was 24 years old and she was a petite brunette, which you will see is Danny Rolling's type. She was studying marketing at Louisiana State University of Shreveport, LSUS. She just transferred to Shreveport earlier in 1989 after attending the Baton Rouge campus, and she was working part-time and she was on the verge of graduation. Her nephew, Sean, who was only 8 years old, was a third grader at Turner Elementary, and he was visiting his grandfather, William, and his Aunt Julie just for the weekend as part of his recent birthday present, and he was supposed to return home that following Monday. So at around 8:30 Monday morning, Sean's mother calls police because she's been calling and she doesn't know where her son is and nobody's answering the phone. According to a 2021 Shreveport Times article, Danny Rolling followed Julie home, watched the family all night, watched their every move, and then he went in through an unlocked back door, which would always become his MO. He was armed with a knife and he assaulted and raped Julie Grissom. And this part is also pretty graphic, but 8-year-old Sean was stabbed with such force that the knife went completely through him and stuck into the ground. Another thing that was a part of Danny's MO was that he would make his victims get on their stomach and have them face down on the ground before he would stab them in the back. Julie's father, 55-year-old Tom Grissom, was divorced. He was an AT&T supervisor, and he was described as being polite, friendly, respectable. Tom had been battling throat cancer for years, but he was getting better, and he was ready to retire. When police arrived, they found Julie's body naked and hanging off of a bed. She was stabbed at least 3 times in the back, but she was turned facing up. And this part is something that would become a part of Danny's procedure, was he would often clean the bodies after he murdered them. So they found vinegar applied to Julie's body. They found Julie's father, his body slumped against a door blocking an entrance, and he had several stab wounds in his back and his chest. Danny Rolling would clean the bodies and then position them provocatively and put their bloody clothes in the washing machine. And then Danny just went home. 2 days later, a neighbor discovers the bodies after police are called, and nobody knows who did this. Danny is never caught for this until he is caught for the Gainesville murders. So 6 months after these horrific murders, Danny gets into this really awful fight with his father. This is the big fight. He confronts his dad and they're really going at it. And it's at this point that Danny takes out a gun and he shoots his father in the stomach and again in the forehead. This results in his father losing his eye and a piece of his ear, but his father lives. So this is when Danny leaves. He's like, you know what? I'm fed up with this shit. He leaves Shreveport in May of 1990 and he heads to Gainesville, Florida. Before Danny Rolling begins his killing spree, he breaks into the home of Michael Kennedy. This is in June of 1990. While inside of that home, he steals 2 handguns and then he steals identification papers of the deceased Michael Kennedy Jr. So now Danny's going to assume the identity of Michael Kennedy Jr. On August 23rd, 1990 at the University of Florida, Christina Powell and Sonia Larson will become Danny Rolling's first two victims in the Gainesville murders. Sonia was 18, Christina was 17. These two girls, they had their whole life ahead of them. They were two university freshmen. They were excited to be sharing this new apartment together. They were excited for their freshman year to begin, and they went to Walmart together. Now, police believe that this is where Danny Rolling saw them, because later when they find out who Danny Rolling is, they do find a Walmart receipt. And now this receipt was found in the girls' apartment, and one of their credit cards was used to purchase the items on the receipt. They were buying new things for their apartment. So the police go to Walmart and they find out that at the same time that Christina and Sonia were at Walmart, somebody bought a tent from Walmart. And this is the same exact model tent that they find Danny Rolling's belongings in the woods near the university. So it is very likely that Danny spotted them at Walmart, followed them back to their apartment. He waited outside of their apartment. He watched them. He watched them doing dishes. He watched them hanging up their new, curtains that they just bought at Walmart. He watched everything they were doing that night, and he waited until the perfect time that he could go in. In what would become Danny's new MO, he used a screwdriver to pry open the sliding glass door. He had his K-bar knife on him. This would become his signature move for breaking into people's homes. He gets into the home. He finds Christina Powell asleep on the couch downstairs. So he stands over her for a short time and watches her sleep, and she doesn't wake up. This is when he decides he wants to go upstairs where Sonia Larson is, and she's also asleep. So he gets upstairs and he breaks in to Sonia's room. He tapes her mouth shut so that she can't scream, and then he stabs her to death with this knife. When he is finished, he goes back downstairs. He stands over Christina. He tapes her mouth shut. He bound her wrists together. He makes her get on her stomach. He cut her clothes off. He raped her. He forced her face down onto the floor, and then he killed her by stabbing her 5 times in the back. And after killing Christina, Danny goes back upstairs and he rapes Sonia Larson's dead body. Now, he poses the bodies in these sexually provocative positions, which he would do with all of his victims. He would clean up the bodies, he would clean up the crime scene, and then he took a shower in their apartment before he left. It's less than 24 hours later that he murders his next victim. And I might have said August 23rd earlier. If I did, that was a mistake. He broke into their apartment so early in the morning. It was actually now August 24th when he murdered Sonia and Christina. So now August 25th, Danny Rolling breaks into the apartment of Krista Hoyt. Krista was an 18-year-old chemistry honor student. She was going to a community college, Santa Fe College. Danny also pried open her sliding glass door with his screwdriver. Krista Hoyt lived in an apartment complex that was less than a half mile from the camp that Danny Rolling had set up in the woods for himself. So police were trying to piece together how Danny could have known Krista, and from what they could find was that there were security cameras that showed Krista going to this convenience store named Vern's Quick Stop. It was a convenience store that was about a half block from her apartment, and it was right across the street from where Danny Rolling was camping out. So police acquire this videotaped surveillance footage of a girl that looks exactly like Krista entering this convenience store on August 25th at 9:28 p.m. And she was only in there for about 2 minutes and she left. Now this same tape, it shows someone that looks exactly like Danny Rolling entering the store several times before this day that Krista is seen in the store. So they're just assuming that he had passed Krista while they were both going to this convenience store and he had his eyes set on her. And this is the shit that scares the hell out of me. You have no idea who's watching you. You're just going into the convenience store, maybe to get gas for your car, maybe to grab something to drink, and you don't realize that this crazy homeless man who's been killing people that lives across the street is watching your every move, watching you go back to your apartment, knows where you live. So it's August 25th. This is less than a day after he just murdered Sonia and Christina. He is inside of Krista's apartment, but she's not home. She's out with friends. She doesn't return home until 11 p.m. And this entire time, Danny Rolling just sits in her house waiting for her. And the minute Krista walks in that door, he puts her in a chokehold. He binds her wrist, he cuts her clothes off, and he rapes her after she is tied up. And then he makes her face down on the floor, get face down, and he stabs her. And the way that he stabbed her with such force, the knife went straight through her aorta, which the medical examiner says is just instant death. And then after he is done, he does something different that he hasn't done at any of his crime scenes yet. I hate talking about this. Okay, he decapitates Krista. And then he places her head in a position so that she is looking at her own mutilated body. 2 days after Sonia and Christina were murdered, their parents are concerned. They're not answering phone calls. They don't know how to get a hold of their daughter, so they call the police. And the police find their bodies in their apartment. And it is only hours later that Krista Hoyt doesn't show up for work. And now Krista was a nighttime clerk at the sheriff's office. So when she doesn't show up for work, 2 police officers drive straight to her house to check on her because they just heard about these 2 girls that were found murdered in their apartment. They get to Krista's house and they find this crime scene. The community is freaking out. Everyone's on high alert. The news has spread across the community and college kids are leaving. They're not going to start classes. When classes are about to begin and everyone's like, I'm out of here. Parents want their kids to come home. This was described as a week of fear. Students don't know who's next. Nobody knows who this guy is. And this is the weekend before the fall classes started for 34,000 University of Florida students. They're excited about all these new experiences. They're excited about football season beginning. And now kids are packing up their things and going home. So by this point, the news of the murders, it was widespread media attention, national news. Many of the students at University of Florida, they started to help each other out. They were changing their daily routines. They were sleeping together in groups, large groups of students, because nobody knew what was going on. And a lot of people, like I said, they withdrew their enrollment and their parents wanted them to transfer to different schools. August 27th, 1990, Tracy Paulus, she is 23 years old. She lived with her roommate, Manny Taboda, who was also 23. Danny Rolling breaks into Tracy's apartment. And of course, he breaks in the same way, through the sliding glass door, using his screwdriver. And he doesn't realize that Tracy has a roommate, and he's a pretty big guy. He's 6'2". He's a burly guy. Now, on the documentary series, World's Most Evil Killers, they talk about the fact that Tracy was home alone for most of the night, and she was calling some friends and telling them, if Manny doesn't come home soon, I'm going to leave because I cannot stay here alone. But then Manny came home, so she felt like she was safe. So Danny Rolling breaks in, and he goes upstairs to find Manny asleep in a bedroom. And he didn't know Manny was going to be there. And I mean, these two get into a huge fight. They are tackling each other. Manny is fighting for his life. And Danny Rolling keeps stabbing him. And he ends up killing him in this struggle. And this whole commotion, it wakes Tracy up. And she's scared out of her mind. She goes down the hall to Manny's bedroom and she sees Danny. So she doesn't know what to do. And she just starts running towards her own bedroom. She barricades herself inside of her bedroom. But Danny, he doesn't take long to just bust down Tracy's bedroom door. And once he's inside, Danny tapes Tracy's mouth and wrist. He cuts off her clothing and he rapes her before turning her over, having her face the floor, and he stabs her 3 times in the back. And then he posed her body. But he did this with the women. Now, he didn't expect Manny to be there. He doesn't pose Manny's body. He doesn't clean Manny's body. He left him in the position in which he died. But with Tracy, he cleaned her up and he posed her. Danny Rolling always posed the bodies in sexually provocative ways. He always cleaned up his victims. And for Christina Powell and Krista Hoyt, Danny actually severed their nipples and then he would place them next to their body. This guy is just so fucked up. And when you hear these stories, it doesn't seem real. It doesn't seem like this is a real thing. This does seem just like something that would happen in a horror movie. You cannot wrap your brain around the fact that somebody did this. Gainesville, the whole community is just in complete fear after learning about the murders of Sonia, Christina, and Krista. Then they find out about Tracy and Manny. And on the same day that they learn, okay, there is a serial killer on the loose and police have no idea who this person is. On this same day, Danny Rolling decides to rob a bank. Tuesday, August 28th, 1990, Tracy and Manny are discovered. There are now 5 murders, and Danny Rolling goes and robs a bank. Okay, so this would be the downfall of Danny Rolling. The police are on the lookout for a serial killer and now a bank robber, having no idea they're the same person. They find these 2 men. They see these 2 men, and they're acting weird. They're acting suspicious. So police start following these 2 guys, and they follow them into the woods. They find a campsite in the woods near the University of Florida. Now, they didn't know that one of these 2 men was Danny Rolling. The other guy was his drug dealer. So Danny catches on pretty quick that he's being tailed. I mean, he's got a lot to lose here. The other guy doesn't understand what's going on, but Danny knows police are watching him and he flees. But the other guy, his drug dealer, he's caught really quick by police and then he's arrested. But Danny he's gone. He got away. So they start searching his campsite, and inside of this tent, this camping tent that Danny had, they find all of this money covered in pink dye, that banks use. So, oh my God, this is the bank robber. So they think, okay, we found the bank robber, but they're not thinking, okay, we found the Gainesville serial killer. Okay, so police gather all of this evidence from the tent, and they're going to keep it, thankfully, because this is going to be really big evidence against Danny in the end. They find a ski mask. They find a gun. They find the money covered in the pink reddish dye. They find pubic hair that they keep. They find pants that seem to have some blood on them. And they're still not making the connection that this is their killer. So they get a lead they get some tips that the killer might be this guy named Edward Humphrey. So the FBI, the police, everyone is like, we got to catch whoever this is and we got to catch them quick because our whole entire community is falling apart. So on August 30th, Edward Humphrey, a kid who lived in the same apartment complex as two of the murdered students, he was identified as someone that could be a suspect by other students because he was aggressive towards other students and he was always getting into physical altercations with other people. So 2 days after the murder of Tracy and Manny, this guy, Edward Humphrey, he gets into a physical fight with his grandma and the police are called and the police arrest him. Now, his grandma doesn't want to press charges against him, but the police believe he might be their suspect. So the state actually presses charges on Edward Humphrey. So they've got Edward Humphrey locked up in jail. A judge says $1 million bail. That's it. Everyone thinks they caught the Gainesville Ripper. This is the main suspect. The town starts to feel a little safer. Everyone's guard is being let down. But they don't know that Danny Rolling is still on the run. And by this time, he's in Tampa, Florida, where he commits 3 more robberies, including holding up a grocery store. So it's 5 days after the last 2 murders, and he tries to rob this grocery store. But the people inside of the grocery store are like, hell no, guy. And the police are called, and Danny Rolling is caught and arrested for robbery. He's taken into custody and he's awaiting trial for robbery, but they have no idea that they have the wrong man in custody as the Gainesville Ripper. The Gainesville Ripper is in custody, but nobody knows. So back in Gainesville, because Danny's in custody in Tampa, back in Gainesville, the DNA test proved that Edward Humphrey is not their guy. And they have to let him go, and the whole town is losing their minds again. So now everyone's back on high alert, and the investigation is stalled. The FBI is, they need to find a guy, and they need to find a guy now. So they're going over every piece of evidence they can, trying to rack their brains like, okay, so they go back to the campsite stuff. Danny Rolling, they found a gun at his campsite. Now, this gun was bought off of a man because the gun had a serial number, and the serial number was still linked to this man that Danny bought the gun from. Stay with me here. So the FBI goes to this man's house and they say, did you sell a gun to someone? And the guy's like, yeah, I sold a gun to this vagrant homeless guy, but I don't know his name, and he paid cash. So the FBI detective says, can you tell me anything about this guy? Is there anything distinctive? A voice, the way he walked? And the guy says, you know what? Yeah, there was something weird. He's missing a finger. And this is the point where I imagine the detectives' brains are sort of like the movie Seven, when the flashbacks start happening and you start realizing everything you missed. They start thinking back to one of the crime scenes. There was a paper towel on the kitchen counter, and this paper towel had something on it. So they start analyzing it, and when they look at it, it looks as though it's an imprint of a penis, as though the killer finished whatever he was doing, wiped himself off with the paper towel, and then turned it around to wipe his hands. But on the back of the paper towel, there's a handprint. And that handprint is missing one finger. And all of these FBI guys are sitting in this room going over this evidence. And they're like, oh my God, the bank robber is the serial killer. They go back. They start looking at all of the evidence from that campsite, from that tent. They go back to the ski mask, the pubic hairs, the blood on the pants, the screwdriver, which matched the marks on every single sliding glass door that Danny Rolling broke into. They also find audio tapes, and on these audio tapes, Danny Rolling talked to himself, and they played the tapes. Here's something Danny said on one of the tapes. I know that I have to run the rest of my life, but I'm getting pretty good at it. I'm a big boy. I can take care of myself. We're all just down here for just a breath. Also, back in Shreveport, Louisiana, the police department is starting to realize that these Gainesville killings, they match the MO of the Shreveport murders that were never solved. So they start talking to the Gainesville Police Department, and now they come up with the idea to test the DNA of all inmates in all of Florida, that were put in jail between a 3 to 4 month window. They had every single prisoner's DNA checked that has been in jail the past 3 to 4 months. And they realized the past 3 to 4 months, the killings have stopped. So their guy must be in jail. So they check all of them. And on January 24th, 1991, Danny Rolling is a match. It's a hit. We have found the Gainesville Ripper. On September 18th, 1991, Danny Rolling is convicted of 3 counts of attempted armed robbery, not murder, armed robbery, and 2 counts of aggravated assault on law enforcement because he attacked an officer. So he was sentenced to life in prison already. The Gainesville Ripper is sentenced to life in prison without even talking about the murders that he committed. But 2 months later, he is indicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder for the Gainesville murders. And initially, Danny Rolling says, "I'm not guilty. It's not me." But it's really weird because he starts to confess. But Danny's not confessing to police, to detectives, to the FBI. He's confessing to an inmate. And he tells this inmate to go tell the police. So this inmate goes and he just tells the entire story. And Danny says that he'll tell all the details. And he blamed everything on a personality disorder. So Danny sits down. He talks to detectives after the inmate tells them everything. And he says, listen, it's not me. You know, because Danny's a victim. We know that. He doesn't do anything. Everything else in the world, it's not because of him. It's because the world hates him. God, I hate this fucking guy. So he tells them all the details, and then he tells investigators that he has some different personalities. He has a personality disorder. One of the personalities is named Enad, and this guy is more like Jesse James. He's like a cowboy, and he's not a good person, but he's not an evil person. He doesn't kill. The one that kills is called Gemini. Gemini is Danny's evil personality, and Gemini makes Danny kill. Danny doesn't want to kill. Gemini wants to kill. Very quickly after, Danny Rolling is diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and paraphilia, which I didn't know what paraphilia was, but it is intense and persistent sexual arousal or attraction to anything that's not sexual by nature. The trial for Danny Rolling begins February 15th, 1994 in Gainesville, Florida, and the death sentence is right on that table. He confessed right away. So this shocks the whole courtroom. The trial begins, it's opening statements, but Danny Rolling stands up. He's like, I did it, changing my plea to guilty. Everyone is completely shocked. On April 20th, 1994, Danny Rolling is sentenced to death, and he is sent to the Florida State Prison. His appeals lasted 12 years. Over and over, they kept appealing. But on the eve of Danny Rolling's death, he admitted to the murders of the Grissom family, the unsolved case from Shreveport, Louisiana. Danny admitted to it. While Danny Rolling was in prison, he had a girlfriend, of course, because don't they all? Her name was Sandra London. Now, Sandra London collaborated with Danny on a book called The Making of a Serial Killer, the true story of the Gainesville murders in the killer's own words. So, Sandra London, she likes to call herself an author. She's known as a controversial true crime author. She likes to date convicted killers. So she was the girlfriend as a teenager of a convicted murderer. And also he was a suspected serial killer named Gerard John Schaefer. And then she became the fiance later in life of Danny Rolling. And she interviewed both of these guys because she wanted to write books, publish books on these guys and make money off of it. Sandra's the type that heard about Ann Rule, how Ann Rule knew Ted Bundy and wrote a book, and Ann Rule's whole career started going. So Sandra's like, oh, yo, I could do this because I dated a serial killer and now I'm engaged to a serial killer. So I remember way back, 2019, 2020, listening to Morbid before I ever had a podcast. They did an episode on the Gainesville Ripper. Our OG ladies, we love Morbid. Giving them a little high five here that you can't see. They talked a lot about Sandra, just a creepy chick. So it is the night before Danny Rolling is to be put to death. Of course, he gets a last meal. He chose lobster tail. The next day, October 25th, 2006, it is Danny Rolling's execution day. The judge says, do you have any last words? Because he is allowed his last words. And Danny Rolling uses this time not to apologize to the victims' families who are there, are present, ready to watch him die by lethal injection. He starts to sing a song to his fiancée.
Recall the day I first saw you. I reached out to say I love you, but it was hard to say. I couldn't touch you. So tell me, baby, what were my words? All my tears run together. Excuse me, Mr. Ron. Down the path you choose to follow. Mr. Ron. So tell me, baby, what were my words? All my tears run together. What were my words? All my tears run together, baby. Just like
Danny Rolling, the Gainesville Ripper, was executed by lethal injection at age 52 on October 25th, 2006. And in the words of Sidney Prescott, our favorite final girl from Scream, but this is life. This isn't a movie. Stay safe and stay paranoid. Stay paranoid.